Of all dinosaur media, little are as influential or popular as Steven Spielberg and Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. This incredible film changed public perception of dinosaurs and brought them into the spotlight beyond children's imaginations. A large part of Jurassic Park's success was, of course, its dinosaurs, the creatures behind it all. Before there was ever a film, Michael Crichton created the book that it was all based on. Though the movie was based off the book, many things were changed from the source material to better fit the big screen. The dinosaurs in both the book and the film are quite different from what you'd expect in real life. Nowadays, science has advanced so far beyond these films and books, and most of the dinosaurs aren't exactly scientifically accurate anymore. However, for its time, it was some of the best dinosaur science yet seen in media, and it changed how everybody viewed dinosaurs. The slow, sluggish lizards of the early films were no more, and the public was introduced to the fast-moving, bird-like dinosaurs that we all know and love today. Many of the dinosaurs in both the movie and the book behave and appear much differently, thanks to Crichton's decision to focus more on horror rather than visual appearance. And even between the book and the film, there's some notable differences in the dinosaur design. In fact, some dinosaurs don't appear in one version or the other and are usually swapped with another dinosaur. So, let's take a look and compare the dinosaurs from the book versus the movie. I'm going to do my best to start at the beginning and work our way through from the start of the novel and film to the end of the novel and film. However, I warn you now, there's a very good possibility that I'm not going to keep that organized. One of the film's most memorable and iconic scenes is the introduction of the sauropod brachiosaurus. In this scene, we are introduced to what is said to be a brachiosaurus, despite the creature more closely resembling Giraffe titan. For the time, it was a fairly accurate design for the creature, prior to our discovery that brachiosaurus heads were less tapered in comparison to their relatives like Giraffe titan. While this scene is incredible, memorable, and iconic, it has one major issue that I still haven't gotten over to this day. The film shows the theory of a brachiosaurus being able to rise up on its hind legs in order to reach taller vegetation. While it's definitely possible that some sauropods did in fact do this, it would not be possible for an animal like Brachiosaurus. Brachiosaurus and its relatives would have extremely elongated front limbs, which would prevent them from doing some kind of motion like that. Despite this inaccuracy, it's still a brilliant introduction, but unfortunately we don't really learn much more about the Brachiosaurus over the course of the film. However, it is worth noting that Hammond's estimation of about a 30-foot long neck is actually fairly accurate. I'm unsure if Jurassic Park meant to imply that sauropods spend more time in the water because of this scene in Jurassic Park, but if that's the case, then that's another pretty big inaccuracy. On terms of accuracy, I'll give the film's Brachiosaurus a 5 out of 10 for keeping the right sauropod body plan but displaying features and abilities not found in the species. Brachiosaurus doesn't appear in the novel. Instead, it's replaced with another sauropod, Apatosaurus, which are sometimes referred to in the book as Brontosaurus. Apatosaurus is referenced in the film as well, being one of the embryos that Nedry ends up stealing. Apatosaurus in the novel are described fairly accurately, with long diplodocid skull and jaws and a low-lying neck, not the raised ones typical of macronarians like Brachiosaurus. These Apatosaurus have vocalizations that are described as being similar to elephants but lower and heavier. In the novel, Apatosaurus are the only animals in Jurassic Park who don't fear the Tyrannosaurus Rex unless they're on their own. As I'm sure you're aware, in the films we never get an exact number on most of the dinosaurs except for a few like Velociraptor, but in the book we actually get down to the specific animal. At the time of the novel's start, there are 17 Apatosauruses on the island, and by the end, only 12 remain. While definitely not the most accurate and definitely lacking some of the newer science, I'll give these sauropods an 8 out of 10 because they lack any glaring issues from a paleontological standpoint. Now, let's talk about some hadrosaurs. In the original Jurassic Park film, we are only briefly introduced to a single species of hadrosaur, Parasaurolophus. These hadrosaurs are seen in the background during the Brachiosaurus scene and are shown to live in the herd amongst them as well. These Parasaurolophus are green with black and white stripes coloring their crests and bodies. A real Parasaurolophus is about 11.5 meters or 37 feet in length, whereas the film's version are about 32 feet or about 10 meters in length. The film's parasaurs have an odd habit of standing and walking upright a majority of the time. While hadrosaurs are certainly capable of being both bipedal and quadrupedal would have been its base stance as opposed to upright. Another fairly large issue is that the parasaurs in the film are almost dragging their tail on the ground because of standing upright, and that's not really even close to being accurate. Based on all these different factors, I'll give the Parasaurolophus a 4 out of 10. In the novel, Parasaurolophus doesn't show up, but they do have two different species of hadrosaurs. The first of these is the namesake for the entire group, Hadrosaurus itself. Unfortunately, in terms of Hadrosaurus, we don't actually have too much to go off of other than they're called duck-billed dinosaurs in the novels. The only other time we see a hadrosaurus is when one of them gets hunted down and killed by the adult tyrannosaur. At the start of the novel, there are 11 hadrosaurus originally bred for the park, but only 4 are alive by the end. Because of the vagueness of the species, I can't really give this one more than a 5 out of 10 for accuracy. The second species of hadrosaur was the ever-famous Maiasaura. Once again, just like Hadrosaurus, this species is very vague in the novel, only being seen very briefly. The only real description we get of Maiasaura is that it had an upturned lip that seemed to be like a smile. Oh, and I almost forgot, it was also beige in color. In the novel, Maiasaura was shown to be one of the animals on the island that was breeding, thanks to the frog DNA that Wu had put in them. However, because of roaming escaped predators like compies and Velociraptors, only a single baby is left by the time of the start of the novel. 21 Maiasaura, not including the baby, were originally created by InGen, with the juvenile bringing their numbers to 22. By the end of the novel, 20 of them still remain, so they did fairly well compared to most of the others. On terms of accuracy, I'll give Maiasaura a 6 out of 10, because despite its vagueness, we still get a decent bit of information. The next dinosaur that we meet in the film is the ever-famous Triceratops. In the film, we are introduced to the sick Triceratops that Harding is treating. However, in the novel, this was different, as the sick animal was a Stegosaurus instead of a Triceratops. However, despite that difference, the illness appears to be the same. The animals are accidentally eating West Indian lilac whenever they consume what are known as gizzard stones. While gizzard stones have been discovered for some animals like sauropods, there's no evidence that Triceratops or Stegosaurus consume them. For those of you that don't know what a gizzard stone is, they're rocks that animals will consume to help them grind up and digest their food. Regardless of its accuracy, these stones are what causes the illness in both animals in the novel and film, though we don't really get too much of a description in the film. In both versions, however, the Triceratops is fairly accurate compared to real life. If you compare the Triceratops to Grant when he's laying on top of it, you can find out that the animal's around 15 feet or 4.5 meters long. That is actually significantly smaller than the real animal, about half the size, as the real one was more comparable to the size of an elephant, albeit quite a bit longer. When it came to their frill, horns, and overall body plan, it was fairly accurate, especially for a movie made all the way back then. Unfortunately for my Triceratops fan, this particular individual does die. While it's not seen in the movie, this same Triceratops is found during the cleanup of the island in 1994 after the Jurassic Park incident, and it's found with Tyrannosaur bite marks all over its corpse. Triceratops does in fact appear in the novel, and it's actually very close to its real-life counterpart. The size for Triceratops given in the novel is actually fairly accurate, reaching at about 30 feet or 9 meters in length and weighing around 8 tons. Based on what I read in the novel, it also seems that they give these animals a longer horn as well, which is actually more accurate than you might think. The thing about the Triceratops horns that we've already found is that we've just found the bony cores. In real life, these horns would have been covered in keratin, making them significantly longer. Because of this, the large sizes we see in the novel of 4 feet or longer when it comes to their horns are actually fairly accurate. They're also claimed to have very poor vision, similar to a rhino, and while this isn't a far-fetched idea, there isn't really any solid backing to it. The trikes in the novel are actually fairly docile animals and have become acquainted with their handlers like Harding and even allow themselves to be petted. They only display signs of aggressions if their herd gets too large, with any number over 4. During this time, they will engage in battles for dominance amongst themselves and has actually caused several Triceratops their life. Though they aren't really aggressive towards humans, and at one point we even are introduced to a young Triceratops who gets named Ralph, who is well enough acquainted with humans that Lex and Grant can hand feed and pet him. In the novel, 8 Triceratops were originally created, including the little baby one. By the end of the novel, 6 of them are still alive, so they didn't do all that bad. On terms of accuracy, I'll be a little lenient on this one. I'll give the film an 8 out of 10 and the novel a 9 out of 10. Stegosaurus, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't appear in the Jurassic Park film except for a brief moment. Alongside several others, it's one of the vials of DNA that Nedry steals, but the creature itself from eating gastroliths and the West Indian lilac berries among them. There are 4 Stegosaurs created in the novel, and all of them would routinely fall sick due to eating these berries. They explain this further that the animals would travel a routine path continuously and fall ill whenever they reach the specific areas. The same sick Stegosaurus that we see early on, we also see again immediately after the Tyrannosaurus attack. Once Tim finally wakes up and gets out of the Land Cruiser, it scares him and he's worried about dealing with such a large animal after just having experienced the Tyrannosaurus Rex firsthand. So, Tim does the only thing he can logically do, and he scares it away by hitting it on the head with a rock. Now, most of you probably already know, but hitting an animal with a rock usually makes them incredibly mad, so that's definitely not advised. This reaction may be because Stegosaurus is depicted as relatively stupid in the novels, and that's not exactly true. Intelligence is a great trait, but it's not the end-all be-all. Most animals, Stegosaurus included, are just as smart as they need to be to survive. Their brain's functions work perfectly for them and do everything that they need it to do. The size of Stegosaurus's brain doesn't necessarily mean it's a dumb animal. Remember kids, when it comes to animals, intelligence is not everything and requires much more investment than it's worth most of the time. By the end of the novel, only a single Stegosaurus remains, the others allegedly having been hunted down and killed by predators. Overall, Stegosaurus's build in the novel isn't entirely bad, but based on the intelligence and everything, I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 9 Gallimimus remains, the rest having been killed off in various predator attacks. Overall, I'd give the Gallimimus probably a 5 out of 10. Serving a somewhat similar role to Gallimimus in the novels, we get two animals, Othnielia and Dryosaurus. Starting with Dryosaurus, they're actually smaller than their real-life counterparts by a decent margin. They're about 3 feet or a little over a meter shorter than their real-life counterpart. In the novel, Dryosaurus is regularly referenced as a hypsi or a hypsilophodont. Nowadays, however, we know that Dryosaurus was an iguanodontid, not a hypsilophodont. We only see Dryosaurus a single time in the novel, being released back into its enclosure after escaping due to Nedry's sabotage. There are 34 Dryosaurus at the start of the novel, and by the end only 14 remained, with over 20 being killed during the incident. I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 10 for how much they got wrong and misnaming the animal a majority of the time. Another similar animal in the novel is often referenced as Othnielia, but today we know them as Nanosaurus. Like Dryosaurus, Nanosaurus was a small dinosaur belonging to the ornithopod group, though Nanosaurus was more basal than its counterpart. Like most Jurassic Park animals, these guys were actually slightly larger than their real-life counterparts. It was once thought that Nanosaurus and its relatives were partially arboreal, living in trees some of the time to avoid ground-based predators. However, that theory has long since been disproven, so that makes this part of the novel no longer very accurate. However, in the novel, due to their life in trees, these animals are excellent jumpers, very similar to the raptors but to a greater degree. On several occasions, the park staff has noticed them leaping clear over their large metal fences. Despite the fact that these animals were herbivorous in reality, the novel depicts them as omnivores, eating meat from carcasses left behind by animals like T-Rex. There are 23 Othies at the start of the novel, and by the end, only 15 remain. On terms of accuracy, I'll give these guys a 6 out of 10 for getting most of the science at the time right despite today's advancements. Nowadays, compies are a staple of Jurassic Park, the tiny raptor rats. The first film didn't include these little animals, but the later films would under the name Compsognathus, which is actually different from its book counterpart. While Compsognathus is definitely a valid species, the novel uses Procompsognathus, an older Triassic species. The compies in the novel, as well as the raptors, are the main source of conflict, as they both are escaping off of the island. On terms of size, body plan, and overall features, the novel's compies actually aren't too far off from their real-life competitor. Unfortunately, once again, these animals lacked feathers, which nowadays we know that Procompsognathus definitely had feathers. By the time the novel begins, compies have already gotten off the island in relatively large numbers. In fact, it's an escaped compy that kind of instigates the whole plot. A compy attacked an American child on vacation, which caused a severe allergic reaction to the compy's venom. This attack and the report of said attack caused a local scientist to search for the animal, which he did with relative ease after it was killed and eaten by a howler monkey. This set off a chain of events that led Alan, Ellie, and several other people going to the island to inspect it. Alongside this, attacks continued along the coast, including a baby being killed in its hospital crib by several compies. As I mentioned earlier, the compies in the novel have fairly potent venom. But this isn't ordinary venom. It's not meant to kill you outright. Instead, it has a high amount of serotonin. Many of you may know that serotonin, alongside dopamine, is known as one of the happy chemicals. Our brain uses this chemical to trigger feelings of pleasure, optimism, and happiness. The compies use this venom for that same reason, so they can elicit a sense of peace in their prey, making them more sluggish and less defensive. Eventually, this overwhelms their prey's senses, allowing the compies to eat at their leisure with very little resistance. And while serotonin is definitely the happy chemical, it can definitely be dangerous if you have too much. Too much serotonin can cause issues like seizures, shivers, fever, and rigid muscles. Too much serotonin was likely the cause of the child's allergic reaction at the beginning of the novel. However, it should kind of go without saying that compies most likely didn't have venom in any capacity, let alone this specific kind of venom. On terms of accuracy, I'll give the compies a 6 out of 10. They're fairly accurate overall, but the venom and lack of feathers is a pretty glaring issue. Another animal that appears in the novel but not in the film is actually not a dinosaur, but it's a pterosaur known as Pterodactylus. Despite seeing several types of pterosaurs in later Jurassic films, Pterodactylus would never appear on the big screen. But Pterodactylus was Jurassic Park's first pterosaur, and they were where it all began. In the novel, Pterodactylus is depicted with 15-foot or 4.5-meter wingspan, slightly larger than their real-life estimates. However, on terms of overall design, these animals were done justice. They were depicted as fast, flying, crestless pterosaurs. Like their real-life counterparts, these guys were fish eaters and mainly stuck to that source of food. They were also covered in what is described as a furry coating, but today we call those pycnofibers. This is actually one of my biggest praises for the novel. Even today, outside of shows like Prehistoric Planet, pterosaurs are rarely depicted as having any coat of feathers. But all the way back in 1989, Michael Crichton included them in his book, and I think that's pretty cool. At the time he wrote Jurassic Park, Pterodactylus was thought to lack a crest. However, today we know that they actually did, in fact, have one. We see 4 pterosaurs in the novel, and Arnold even confirms this later in the novel as well. However, when we look at the charts, it shows that there are 6 pterosaurs, even though we only see 4, so I'm not really sure what's up with that. However, all 4 of the pterosaurs that we see survive until the end of the novel. They were fiercely territorial and aggressive and attacked anyone who entered their habitat. While they were not physically strong enough to fly off with a person, which is another fantastic spot of accuracy on Crichton's part, they would fold their wings and dive, much like peregrine falcons or an osprey. They would use this force to deliver tremendous impacts to people like construction workers and knock them out several times. I have to say, this is probably the most accurate species in the novel, and it's not even a dinosaur. While there's definitely some issues, like its lack of crest and size, I'd give these guys a 9 out of 10. Before we get to the last few creatures, there are some species mentioned in both the book and the film that we never get to see. In the film, as Nedry is stealing the embryos, we see several dinosaur names appear on different DNA vials. The dinosaurs here that are not shown in the film are Parasaurolophus, Compsognathus, Stegosaurus, Metriacanthosaurus, Baryonyx, Herrerasaurus, Stegosaurus, Corythosaurus, Pteranodon, and Troodon. However, despite none of them appearing in the first film, we would see some of these creatures in subsequent Jurassic Park media and film. In the Telltale Jurassic Park game, we get to meet both Herrerasaurus and the Troodons. Others, like Compsognathus and Stegosaurus, would appear in The Lost World, and in the third Jurassic Park film, we are introduced to both Corythosaurus and Pteranodon as well. And we would also end up getting Baryonyx in the second Jurassic World film, as well as Camp Cretaceous. Parasaurolophus and Metriacanthosaurus never showed up in the big screen, but they both appear in the Jurassic World Evolution video games. Stegosaurus is the only animal on the film's list that doesn't appear in any Jurassic content whatsoever. Poor guy. In the novel, there are 3 other species. 2 of them we never see, and 1 we only see for a very brief moment. A species known as Microceratops in the novel, today known as Microceratus, appeared very briefly. They were a free-roaming addition to the park and were seen in the treetops as Grant and the kids went down the Jungle River. There were 22 of these minuscule ceratopsians at the beginning of the Nublar incident, but only 13 remained by the end of the novel. The other 2 species that we unfortunately never see are Euoplocephalus, which is a large ankylosaurid and my favorite ankylosaurid, and Styracosaurus, a mid-sized ceratopsian. There are 16 Euoplocephalus at the beginning of the novel and only 9 remaining at the end. As for Styracosaurus, there were 18 of them originally made by InGen, with only 7 of them alive at the end. Because none of these animals actively appeared until either later installments or just didn't appear at all, I'm not going to give any of them an accuracy rating for the moment. Which brings us to the big 3 of Jurassic Park: Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and Dilophosaurus. Out of all 3, Dilophosaurus has the least amount of time from both the film and the novel, as it only appears to kill Nedry, except for the book, where it does appear very briefly. In the film, Dilophosaurus is one of the most iconic dinosaurs, largely due to its massive frill. This frill is based on modern frilled lizards, and as I'm sure you're aware, this has no solid backing in science for Dilophosaurus. The animal in the film also had a dromaeosaur-like skull, far different from its real-life counterpart. Even with the slight size increase in later shows like Camp Cretaceous, they were still incredibly small compared to reality. Real Dilophosaurus stand at around 8 feet or 2.4 meters tall and around 23 feet or 7 meters in length. The only thing that the films get kind of right about Dilophosaurus is their crest, which is still the wrong shape in the film. As we all know, the Dilophosaurs in the film spit venom at their prey, and this venom could be launched over 20 feet or 6 meters away. While not necessarily the most accurate, it still managed to hit Nedry's eyes, clearly causing him pain and disorienting him. While the venom clearly hurt and stopped him and disoriented him for a moment, he was still able to recover and get inside his vehicle. But we all know what happens next, and we know that the Dilophosaurus gets its meal. However, on terms of accuracy, Dilophosaurus is probably the least accurate dinosaur in the film, and I'm going to give them a 1 out of 10. As for the novel, that's another story entirely. This Dilophosaurus is actually slightly larger than its real-life counterpart, being around 10 feet or 3 meters tall and upwards of 25 feet or 7.5 meters in length. This Dilophosaurus has a leopard-like patterning with a light green underbelly, and its crests are designated as V-shaped and bright red. We don't really get much more of a description of the animal than that, but even this simple description is better than the film's animal in every way. Before killing Nedry, a single Dilophosaurus is seen drinking from a river as the tour passes by the Dilophosaur enclosure. Beyond that, it only appears for one scene, just like in the film, Nedry's death. As opposed to the film, where you kinda want Nedry to die, this death is played as much more terror than comedy in the novel. Nedry is certainly not the good guy of the books, but he definitely doesn't deserve what happened to him. Like the film, this Dilophosaurus has venom, but it can spew theirs up to 15 meters or 50 feet away. Their venom is said to be made of 7 different enzymes, but what enzymes those are never specified. They can spit their venom with about as much accuracy as the film's version, but their venom is so much worse. Aside from causing so much pain on Nedry that he was almost unable to move, it also blinds him completely. Of course, this trait is meant to be played as horror and also to make the Dilophosaurus' job of killing Nedry much easier. Back when the novel was created, it was thought that Dilophosaurus didn't have a powerful bite and they couldn't bring down prey easily with just their jaws. The thoughts of Dilophosaurus' bite force changed multiple times over the following years, and it's likely that's why the venom was included in the first place as a reason that the Dilophosaurus didn't need a strong bite. Crichton likely added that so that instead of relying on the bite, he could rely on the venom to subdue the prey beforehand. However, nowadays we know that Dilophosaurus had a bite powerful enough to puncture bone and had air sacs that allowed unidirectional airflow similar to birds and crocodiles. All the evidence points towards Dilophosaurus being a fast, agile, and active hunter and would have no need for any kind of venom. At the start of the novel, there are 7 Dilophosauruses, and by the end, only 4 of them remain. I'll give the film's version a 6 out of 10 for getting most things correct except the venom, which is a pretty big inaccuracy. That brings us to the main attraction of Jurassic Park, the biggest predator in the first film and novel, Tyrannosaurus Rex. In the first film, the T-Rex, or Rexy as we all affectionately call her, is the star of the show. Rexy, the main tyrannosaur of the film, is 13.5 meters or just over 44 feet in length and standing at around 5.5 meters or 18 feet tall. She is a behemoth larger than any tyrannosaur fossil yet found, but definitely not outside the realm of possibility. Like most tyrannosaurs, she had a fairly powerful bite and a large and powerful skull to do significant damage. Rexy was only 5 years old at the time of the Nublar incident, which means she shouldn't have yet reached this full adult size due to Tyrannosaurus Rex growth rates. From what we can tell, real tyrannosaurs seem to stay below 2 tons until about 14 years of age, when they begin to rapidly and suddenly grow for about 4 years until they reach adult size. Of course, this would depend on the availability of resources as well, and could potentially shorten or increase the time before their rapid development. Rexy's powerful bite is never displayed in full glory until later films, and even then, it's usually underplayed compared to what it was in real life. Rexy is also far skinnier than a tyrannosaur should be, likely due to shrink wrapping that was common for most dinosaurs during this time. Because of that, she likely weighed less than she should have as well. However, the biggest issue I have with the Rex in the film is her vision issues. In the film, and a couple times in the novel as well, they state that Tyrannosaurus can't see you if you don't move. Where this line came from and why it's said is still not really even known today. Most of the consensus online seems to be that Crichton made it up specifically for the plot, as there was almost no other way for a person to escape a tyrannosaur in that situation. Later films try to use the excuse of amphibian DNA, but that would still not make this true, as most amphibians can still see stationary objects but just don't interpret them as food. In fact, Tyrannosaurus was one of the dinosaurs that had no amphibian DNA in it whatsoever. Even Michael Crichton himself realized how big of a mistake this was and retcons himself in the second book by saying that the Rex could in fact see the whole time but was likely confused or being territorial instead of aggressive. On terms of accuracy, I'll give the film's Tyrannosaurus a 5 or 6 out of 10 at most. As for the novel, there's not 1 but 2 Tyrannosaurs. The younger one is 2 years old and is already about 8 feet tall and 20 feet long at the start of the novel. The older one, sometimes referred to as Roberta, her age is not given, but at maximum she would be 6 years old at the time of the novel's Nublar incident, because InGen was started in 1983. Which means that, just like the movie, their size is inaccurate for their age. The adult Tyrannosaur, Roberta, is over 20 feet or 6 meters tall, and at that height he was likely well over 45 feet or 13.7 meters in length. While I wouldn't put it past Crichton to believe that the Tyrannosaur was shrink-wrapped, he never explicitly said that the skin was like that, so I'm not going to give him any points off because of that. However, in the novel, they do show off the Tyrannosaur's powerful bite force several times in comparison to the movie. The first time we really get to see the Tyrannosaur's true power is when it lifts one of the vehicles with just its jaws and throws it a significant distance away. Later, as opposed to the animal taking down a Gallimimus like in the film, it uses one powerful bite to bring down a Hadrosaurus. The Tyrannosaur also bites Ian Malcolm, and Malcolm himself says that the Tyrannosaur's heart wasn't in it and it didn't bite him with full force. Despite this, it still broke his leg. And even the young one had incredibly powerful jaws, strong enough to rip Regis's leg clean off of his body. Despite being slightly better than the film's version, I still have to knock off a bunch of points just because of their eyesight issue. So I'm going to give the novel version a 7 out of 10. Finally, we get to the main antagonists of both the film and the novels, Velociraptor. At this point, I'm sure most of you know that Velociraptor is only around 2 feet or 0.6 meters tall with a maximum of about 7 feet or 2.1 meters in length. And of course, the real raptors were also covered in feathers. Not too much different from many ground-based birds today, but of course, in Jurassic Park, this is a much different story. Both the films and the novels' Velociraptors are based on Deinonychus, a larger relative of Velociraptor. However, even based on Deinonychus, both versions of this animal are far too large. Deinonychus reached about 4 feet or 1.2 meters tall and could end up being 11 feet or 3.3 meters in length. While they were quite a bit larger than Velociraptor, they were still not the same size as the Jurassic Park raptors. So where did the raptor's size really come from? Some fans like to argue that this Velociraptor is actually a Kilobator. However, we know that that isn't true because a Kilobator wasn't described until well after Jurassic Park. Other folks claim that Utah Raptor is the basis for the Jurassic Park raptors, but that isn't true either. Utah Raptor wasn't made public information until later in 1993 after the film's release. However, fun fact, Steven Spielberg enjoyed its discovery because it made his raptors seem more plausible. The size of these animals actually came from both Crichton and Spielberg. Crichton upscaled his raptors for dramatic effect, and Spielberg did the same while also saying that he was unimpressed by Deinonychus. Both raptors are around the same size, stood around 6 feet tall or 1.8 meters, and were around 16 feet or 5 meters in length, kind of midway between Deinonychus and Utah Raptor. The first film's raptors are dark brown in color and fairly intelligent. In the introduction to Jurassic Park, a raptor nearly escapes its enclosure and manages to kill a worker named Joffrey while they still manage to keep it contained. We are told throughout the film about the raptor's intelligence, like them testing the fences when the feeders came to the point that they had to feed them through other means. They display this intelligence again by opening doors later in the film and setting a trap for both Muldoon and Ellie. They are shown to be able to work in coordination with one another, with one particularly large individual who is referenced as the Big One leading them. According to Muldoon, InGen originally bred 8 Velociraptors, but when they introduced the Big One, she killed all but 2 of the others. The Big One is also the reason the raptors were systematically attacking the fences when the feeders came. These raptors also have rather thick skulls compared to the real Velociraptor and Deinonychus, a trait gained specifically for the film, once again more like animals like Utah Raptor. Jurassic Park's raptors also have a pretty big issue in the fact that they can pronate their wrists and bend them like this. Real Velociraptors, alongside most theropod dinosaurs, could not pronate their wrists like that and would instead carry them at their side, kind of like this. And of course, you already saw this coming. They don't get a very high score in terms of accuracy. They still did better than the Dilophosaurus though, so I'm going to give them a 2 out of 10 instead. The raptors in the novel look quite a bit different from the film. These ones were green or yellow in color with dark brown stripes like a tiger, and the young were more of a bright yellow color with the same stripes as the adults. Their skulls and snouts were also thinner, courtesy of Crichton, making them more in line with other real-life dromaeosaurs. However, an odd feature that Crichton gave these guys is that they have a forked tongue similar to a lizard, which is definitely not true. According to the novel's Muldoon, these were vicious animals, and our first hint at what they could do was in the prologue. Here, we meet a young construction worker who was mauled. He had slashes on his palms and on his arms, and one brutal cut on his abdomen down to his legs. His wounds were way too severe, and despite being seen by a doctor, he died right there on the doctor's operating table after vomiting blood. We don't see the raptors again in the novel until Grant, Malcolm, and several others go to visit their enclosure. The raptors are unnervingly quiet and distract Grant and the others by allowing one member of their pack to be seen. While they're distracted, 2 other raptors bolt from both sides of the foliage and leap at the fence in an attempt to hunt the group. Despite the fence showering the group with sparks, it does manage to protect them, but the group is still disturbed by the sheer efficiency, speed, and brutality of the attack. After the raptors escaped, they killed several workers and security guards, leaving scattered bodies and parts everywhere. Muldoon attempts to put a stop to that and kills one raptor and blows another one's leg off with his rocket launcher. Unfortunately for both Muldoon and Arnold, they both get chased and cornered by raptors on 2 separate occasions. For some reason, John Arnold believes the raptor can't follow him down a set of stairs, so when he runs down to the bottom of it, he's surprised when the raptor just jumps down. Even though Arnold was killed, it still seemed that he managed to wound the raptor. Despite this raptor's injury, it still lays in wait and sets a trap for Gennaro and attempts to hunt him when he comes in to find Arnold. Unfortunately for this wounded raptor, Gennaro was not having it, and he fought it off and managed to escape. The raptor's jumping capability is also shown later when the raptors are able to jump straight onto a second-story window. They were also able to climb trees to be able to get directly on top of Jurassic Park's hotel's roof. Their intelligence is displayed most prominently in the novel when they distract Ellie. They keep Ellie and the others' attention on the fence long enough for a raptor to jump down from the roof and kill Wu and chase Ellie into the building. However, no matter how smart the raptors are, they were shown to be outsmarted on 2 separate occasions. The first time is when Tim tricked one into going into a freezer before rushing over and locking it inside, very similar to the movie. The second time is when Grant uses eggs and poison syringes to trick the raptors and kill them to save himself, Gennaro, and the kids. Just like in the film, there were 8 raptors created for Jurassic Park, however their leader didn't kill off any when they arrived. The raptors were one of the most prominent breeding species on the island, and by the start of the novel there are 37 raptors total on the island. The young raptors that had hatched were small enough to escape confinement, and some managed to escape and free roam on the island, while some managed to leave the island completely. Over time, these wild raptors formed a colony led by a matriarch, and these raptors seemed to be much more peaceful than their captive counterparts. Their pack had some semblance of organization and arranged themselves neatly within their nesting site. By the end of the novel, 27 raptors remained, with most of the dead ones being the ones that were held in captivity. I'll give the novel raptors a 4 out of 10, because honestly, they're not much better than the film's versions. And there you have it, folks, all the dinosaurs of the first Jurassic Park film and novel compared side by side. What was your favorite dinosaur from either version? Let me know in the comments below. Once again, thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and check back soon for more. Remember to be good people, and I'll see you guys in the next one.